Welcome to Clinical Capsule, your trusted guide for clear and concise medical learning.
What if I told you that having high blood pressure, getting it treated by a doctor, and, returning your numbers to perfectly normal still leaves you with double the risk of a cardiovascular event compared to someone who just naturally maintained a healthy blood pressure?
Yeah, I mean, it is a completely startling realization for a lot of people. We have this heavily reactive mindset embedded in us. We basically wait for the symptom to appear before we take any action at all.
We really do. I mean, we treat our bodies like we treat a broken down appliance.
Right.
You wait for the engine light to come on, you take it to the mechanic, they write a prescription or patch the tire, and suddenly you consider yourself, fixed.
Exactly.
But when you look at the absolute cutting edge of preventative medicine, you quickly realize that waiting for that breakdown is just a terrible strategy for human biology. We shouldn't be fixing a breakdown. We should be actively directing the trajectory of your entire life.
It requires a complete paradigm shift, really, in how we view the human machine.
Definitely. Well, welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today, our mission is to take a massive stack of sources, articles, research papers, and specifically, we are leaning heavily today on excerpts from a clinical medical text called Promoting Good Health.
Which is incredibly dense.
Oh, it is. But we are going to distill these clinical guidelines into an ultimate, evidence-based daily blueprint just for you. We're covering exactly what to eat, how to move, and how to sleep. And the goal here isn't just about maximizing your lifespan, like the sheer number of years you manage to stay breathing.
Right, it's about health span.
Exactly. It's about maximizing your health span.
Okay.
Let's unpack this, because before we can give you the blueprint, we really have to look at the underlying mechanics of why this specific daily plan actually works.
Yeah, and to understand the mechanics, we have to recognize that medical science doesn't view prevention as a single concept. They actually break it down into 4 distinct levels.
Let's walk through those, because this totally reframed how I see my doctor visits.
Yeah, so let's start at the absolute end of the line, which is tertiary prevention. This is emergency damage control.
Like surgery.
Right. You are actively having a heart attack, and a surgeon is deploying a stent to force your blocked artery open. They are preventing imminent death. Stepping one level back, we have secondary prevention.
Okay.
This is for someone who already has a diagnosed condition, like a patient in remission from breast cancer. The medical intervention is designed to prevent the disease from recurring or progressing.
So tertiary and secondary are basically putting out a fire that has already burned down half the house.
Exactly. Then we move upstream to primary prevention. This is the realm of the annual physical.
Yeah.
You haven't had a heart attack,
Yeah.
but your doctor notices your blood pressure is creeping up.
So you have a known risk factor.
Yes. So they prescribe a medication, maybe a daily pill, to bring that pressure down and artificially prevent the disease from manifesting.
But according to the clinical text, even primary prevention is fundamentally flawed. Which brings us to the 4th level, and the whole point of our blueprint today, primordial prevention.
Yeah, primordial prevention is the holy grail of medicine. It was first conceptualized around 1979, and it's not about treating a risk factor. It is about living in a way that prevents the risk factor from ever developing in the first place.
I want to use an analogy here because it helps so much. Think about owning a beautiful, vintage, classic car. Primary prevention is noticing the engine temperature gauge is running a little hot, so you pull over and top off the coolant.
Right, a quick fix.
Yeah, it keeps the car from exploding today, but the engine is still fundamentally running hot. Primordial prevention is the meticulous daily maintenance. It's using the premium fuel, the right synthetic oil, keeping it in a climate-controlled space, so that engine never runs hot in the first place.
It's a great way to look at it.
Right, like, are you doing the daily maintenance so the car runs perfectly until the day the engine finally gives out? Or are you just ignoring it, patching leaks with duct tape, and driving a sputtering clunker for 40 years?
That classic car analogy maps perfectly onto human physiology. Because, going back to your opening point, treating a risk factor never fully erases the danger. If your doctor successfully treats your high blood pressure with a pill, the numbers on the monitor look fantastic.
But you still carry the risk.
Yeah, you still carry twice the risk of a cardiovascular event compared to someone doing primordial prevention.
Why is that, though? I mean, if the monitor says 120/80, shouldn't my risk be the same?
Well, because of the silent structural damage that occurred while the pressure was elevated. Blood pressure isn't just a number, it is a literal physical force. It is the sheer mechanical force of fluid slamming against the delicate inner lining of your blood vessels.
Oh, wow.
Over time, That high-pressure flow causes microscopic tears in the vessel walls.
Like blasting a garden hose at maximum pressure until the rubber starts to fray and crack.
Precisely. And your body tries to heal those microscopic cracks by sending cholesterol and inflammatory cells to patch them up. That patch is what we call plaque. So the time spent with high blood pressure accelerated your atherosclerosis.
The buildup of track.
Right. It thickened your heart muscle because the heart had to pump harder against the resistance. You cannot undo that structural physical remodeling just by taking a pill to lower the pressure later. Primordial prevention abolishes that lifetime risk because the fraying of the hose never occurs.
Which leads directly into a concept in the text that provides the most incredible visual, this idea of squaring the curve.
Yeah, so if you graph a standard human life, what doctors call normative aging looks like a slow, agonizing downward slope.
Just a steady decline.
Exactly. You slowly lose your vitality, you get a chronic illness in your 50s, you require a walker in your 70s, and you spend decades in a state of gradual, medicalized decline.
Driving the sputtering clunker.
Right. But squaring the curve means changing the shape of that graph entirely. You push all of that illness, all of that decline, to the absolute very end of your life.
Okay, I see.
You stay at peak health, a flat line, straight across the top of the graph for decades. Then you experience what geriatricians call compression of morbidity, a very short, rapid decline right before the end of your natural lifespan.
You live vibrantly, fully independent, and then you just stop.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is exactly why the American Heart Association shifted its entire focus away from defining cardiovascular disease and toward defining cardiovascular health.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they created a framework of 7 metrics, things like your eating pattern, physical activity, and blood sugar. They realized that if physicians focus on health promotion, empowering you to maintain that high-performance machine, it is infinitely more motivating than fear-mongering about an impending heart attack. Giving people a positive target drives real, sustainable behavior change.
Well, let's give the listener that positive target right now. Let's build the daily blueprint. To keep that curve perfectly square, to maintain the classic car, we have to start with the premium fuel we are putting into the tank.
The diet.
Yeah. Let's dive into the optimal eating pattern. And looking at the dietary guidelines for Americans referenced in our sources, considering all the noise out there, it's remarkably unified.
It is. I mean, we suffer from intense fad diet fatigue. Every week there's a new rule about what you can or cannot eat. But the actual clinical consensus among preventive medicine experts hasn't really wavered.
Right.
The absolute non-negotiable foundation is nutrient-dense whole foods.
But the text does lay out some very specific quantitative hard limits. The rules are less than 10% of your daily calories should come from added sugars. Less than 10% should come from saturated fats. And you need to keep your sodium intake under 2,300 milligrams a day.
Those are the big 3.
Let's break those down. Let's start with the 10% sugar rule. For the listener right now who grabbed a seemingly healthy yogurt or granola bar on their way out the door, they might have blown through that limit without even knowing it. Why does the text specify added sugars versus just sugar?
It all comes down to how your body processes the fuel. If you eat an apple, you are consuming naturally occurring fructose. But that sugar is locked inside a matrix of dietary fiber.
Okay.
When it hits your digestive tract, the fiber physically slows down the absorption of the sugar into your bloodstream. It's a slow, steady release of energy.
Right, it doesn't just hit you all at once.
Exactly. Added sugars, like the high fructose corn syrup pumped into that granola bar, have no fiber. They hit your bloodstream instantly. Your pancreas panics and pumps out a massive surge of insulin to clear the sugar, which ultimately leads to insulin resistance and stores that excess energy directly as visceral fat.
And what about the sodium limit? 2,300 milligrams. Why is salt the enemy of the blood vessels?
Well, it's basic chemistry and osmosis. Where sodium goes, water follows. When you consume a heavy load of sodium from processed foods, it enters your bloodstream and physically draws excess water from surrounding tissues into your blood vessels.
So it's literally a volume problem. You are increasing the sheer volume of fluid inside a closed vascular system.
Exactly. More fluid volume in the same amount of space equals higher pressure. That's how a high-sodium diet instantly cranks up your blood pressure and starts causing those microscopic vessel tears we talked about earlier.
To help visualize how to avoid this, the USDA guidelines moved away from that old food pyramid we all grew up with and created the healthy plate model.
The visual is really helpful.
It is. Imagine your dinner plate. Fully 50% of the physical space on that plate should be fruits and vegetables. The remaining half is split evenly between whole grains and lean proteins.
And the sources highlight specific eating patterns backed by immense clinical trial data that naturally fit this visual. The Mediterranean diet is a famous one. There's also the DASH diet, which stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension.
How does the DA-shaped diet actually stop the hypertension? Is it just about avoiding salt?
Avoiding salt is part of it, but the brilliance of the DASH diet is what it adds. It is incredibly high in potassium and magnesium, primarily sourced from massive amounts of leafy greens, beans, and nuts.
Oh, I see.
Like potassium essentially acts as the biological opposite of sodium. It signals the smooth muscle cells lining your blood vessels to relax and dilate, naturally lowering the pressure in the hose.
That makes so much sense. But I have to challenge something here. The text goes out of its way to note that daily caloric needs vary wildly. Like a sedentary toddler needs maybe 1,000 calories. An active teenage boy might need 3,200.
Sure.
With all this focus on macronutrients, saturated fats, and specific food groups, does the source actually say what drives weight loss? Because frankly, balancing all these ratios sounds exhausting.
What's fascinating here is that the clinical feeding studies mentioned in the text cut right through the noise. Weight loss is fundamentally, inextricably driven by a negative calorie balance.
Just eating less.
It is far more dependent on reducing your overall energy intake than on the specific macro composition of fat, protein, and carbohydrates.
So the body doesn't magically melt fat just because I stopped eating carbs?
No, not at all. If you need to lose weight, you have to force your body to tap into its internal reserves. When you consume fewer calories than your body requires to function, a negative balance, your insulin levels drop.
Right.
That low insulin state acts as a chemical signal, telling your fat cells to release stored triglycerides to be burned for energy. That process, called lipolysis, is what shrinks fat mass.
So calories dictate your weight, but the quality of those calories dictates your vascular health.
Precisely. If you eat fewer calories, but all of them come from fast food, you might lose weight, but you are still hammering your blood vessels with sodium and your liver with sugar.
That's a huge distinction.
Since massive doses of sodium and refined sugars are the absolute hallmarks of packaged, ultra-processed foods, the most effective hack for you is to simply cook your meals at home, starting from raw, whole fats. You naturally bypass the engineered traps.
Okay, so we've put premium fuel in the tank to avoid engine buildup. But a classic car doesn't stay pristine just by sitting in the garage with a full tank of gas. The engine actually needs to run to keep the belts from rotting. How does the text translate that to human movement?
The clinical guidelines introduced a brilliantly simple golden rule for movement. If you're doing nothing, do something, and if you're doing something, do more every day.
It's a great mantra, but they also give us the exact evidence-based dose of movement required to maintain the machine. For adults, the baseline target is 150 minutes of moderate-intensity aerobic activity every week.
Which means brisk walking, cycling on a flat road.
Yeah, something where your heart rate is elevated, but you can still hold a conversation. Alternatively, you can hit 75 minutes of vigorous intensity activity, like jogging or swimming laps, where you're too breathless to speak in full sentences.
And they mandate that this aerobic activity should be done in episodes of at least 10 minutes at a time to trigger the cardiovascular benefits. Furthermore, there is a strict requirement for muscle strengthening activities. At least 2 days a week, you need to engage all your major muscle groups.
And I found this detail really reassuring. You don't need to be powerlifting massive plates in the gym.
No, not at all.
The clinical text actually recommends using lighter weights with higher repetitions, like 3 sets of 15 to 20 reps. It provides the necessary metabolic stress to the muscle tissue while drastically lowering the risk of joint injury, which is crucial for a health span as we age.
Absolutely.
But I want to pivot to the desk workers out there, because the text highlighted a specific danger regarding sitting that completely shocked me.
The clinical data on sedentary time is genuinely alarming. Sitting at a desk all day has severe adverse health consequences that operate completely independently of your exercise routine.
Wait. Independent. So if I wake up at 6 a.m., crush a heavy, sweaty 45-minute spin class, and then sit at my computer for 9 straight hours, I'm still doing damage.
Yes.
Wow. It's like leaving that classic car idling in a tightly sealed, poorly ventilated garage. Even if I took it out for a beautiful high-speed spin on the highway that morning, the exhaust is still quietly building up in the garage all afternoon, slowly poisoning the environment.
It's the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And the biological exhaust in this case is metabolic stagnation. When you sit completely still, The large muscles in your legs and core go entirely dormant.
Okay.
When those muscles are inactive, your body drastically downregulates an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, or LPL.
What does LPL do?
LPL is essentially a vacuum cleaner that sits on the walls of your blood vessels, sucking fats and sugars out of your bloodstream to be used as fuel by the muscles.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, when you sit, LPL activity plummets. The vacuum turns off. So the fats and sugars from your lunch just pool in your bloodstream, driving up systemic inflammation and insulin resistance. You must break up sedentary time.
So standing up, stretching.
Standing up, doing gentle stretching, pacing while on a phone call, it turns the vacuum cleaner back on. It is a non-negotiable part of the blueprint.
Now, speaking of movement, here's where it gets really interesting. Because in fitness, we are conditioned to think more is always better. But the text drops a massive caveat about extreme endurance activities. We're talking ultramarathons, Ironman triathlons.
It does. While exercise is undeniably medicine, extreme, prolonged endurance events, particularly if an individual is not meticulously and scientifically trained for them, cross the line from healthy stress to toxic stress.
Really?
Yeah, they can cause measurable physical damage to your myocardial cells, the actual muscle cells of your heart.
The text mentions that doctors find elevated troponin levels in the blood of these athletes at the finish line. Now, I'm not a doctor, but isn't troponin the exact biomarker emergency room doctors look for when they suspect someone is actively having a heart attack?
It is, and that is exactly why this is so physiologically alarming. Troponin is a protein that is supposed to be locked safely inside your heart muscle cells, helping them contract. It should not be in your bloodstream.
So it's leaking.
Yes. When heart cells are pushed beyond their absolute limit, they become damaged, they break open, and they leak troponin into the blood. The heart is under such immense, unyielding oxidative stress during a poorly trained ultra-endurance event that it is experiencing acute cellular injury.
So it can literally run your heart into the ground.
If you push a machine past its red line for too long, things break. Which is why the clinical text emphasizes the curvilinear benefit of exercise. Imagine a graph where the horizontal axis is minutes of exercise and the vertical axis is health benefits. The line doesn't go up at a straight 45-degree angle forever.
Right.
The most massive, steep, life-altering health benefits occur right at the beginning when you go from doing 0 minutes of activity a week to just 60 or 90 minutes of moderate walking. The line shoots almost straight up.
And then it curves.
Yeah, as you push past 150 minutes, you keep gaining benefits. But the line starts to curve. It flattens out. The marginal return on investment for the 10th hour of training in a week is minuscule compared to the first hour. You absolutely do not need to be an extreme endurance athlete to square your curve.
You just need consistent, moderate maintenance. Okay, so we've fueled the engine with whole foods, we've driven the car, hitting our 150 minutes and making sure we don't leave it idling in the garage. Now the car has to go into the shop for daily repairs.
Right, the recovery phase.
Exactly. And that brings us seamlessly to the final section of our daily blueprint, sleep.
And the clinical text is adamant here. Sleep is not a luxury. It's not just about feeling rested. The text frames sleep hygiene as a strict biological medical necessity.
And the baseline is 7 to 9 hours, right?
The baseline standard for adults is unequivocally 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night.
And the physiological cascade that happens when you drop below that 7-hour mark is genuinely terrifying. The sources link chronic sleep restriction directly to obesity, type 2 diabetes, elevated blood pressure, severe cardiovascular disease, a suppressed immune system, and I couldn't believe this one increased pain sensitivity. Your body literally hurts more when you're tired.
Well, because we fundamentally misunderstand what sleep is. Sleep isn't an off switch where the brain does nothing. It's a hyperactive biological state.
Okay, how so?
During deep sleep, a network in your brain called the glymphatic system opens up and literally flushes out neurotoxic waste proteins that built up during the day. Furthermore, your body is repairing cellular damage and resetting your entire endocrine system, your metabolic hormones.
So what does this all mean for the high-achieving hustle culture listeners out there? Because I hear it all the time, I'm going to cut my sleep down to 5 hours so I can wake up at 4 a.m., hit my 150 minutes of exercise, and meal prep my healthy whole food plate. Are they actually sabotaging the very health they are trying to build?
Without question. When you deprive yourself of sleep, your body perceives that as an acute survival threat. Your sympathetic nervous system goes into overdrive, pumping out cortisol, your primary stress hormone.
That sounds bad.
It is. That cortisol signals your liver to dump glucose into your blood and simultaneously drops your cellular insulin sensitivity. You become temporarily insulin resistant.
Which means your body can't process sugars efficiently, so it stores them as fat.
Exactly. The text explicitly notes that adequate sleep directly improves weight loss success and blood pressure control. You cannot out-exercise a severe sleep deficit. The biological math does not work.
Wow. Okay, so how do we fix the sleep architecture? The text lays out a specific clinical sleep hygiene protocol.
It starts while the sun is still up. Encourage daily physical activity to build up sleep pressure, promoting natural fatigue. As you approach bedtime, avoid heavy meals or drinking alcohol.
Well, wait, people always say a nightcap helps them sleep.
Right, alcohol is tricky because it acts as a central nervous system depressant. It might make you feel drowsy and help you lose consciousness faster, but it completely fragments and destroys your sleep architecture. It suppresses REM sleep and deep restorative sleep.
And the guidelines strongly discourage trying to fix this with a pill. They warn against the regular use of sedative medications.
For multiple reasons. There is a high risk of chemical dependency, of course,
Sure.
but more importantly, sedatives don't produce natural sleep, they produce sedation. There is a profound neurological difference between the restorative brain waves of natural sleep and simply being chemically rendered unconscious. You aren't getting the physiological repairs.
The clinical text also flags a massive hidden epidemic that is physically destroying people's sleep without them even knowing it: obstructive sleep apnea, or OSA.
This is a critical point for primordial prevention. As obesity rates have climbed, the prevalence of sleep apnea has skyrocketed. OSA occurs when the muscles in the back of your throat relax too much during sleep, and the physical weight of surrounding tissue collapses your airway.
Oh my.
Yeah, the person literally stops breathing, sometimes dozens or hundreds of times an hour.
They are essentially suffocating in their sleep.
Yes. And every time the airway collapses, the brain panics, spikes adrenaline to wake the body up just enough to gasp for air, and then falls back asleep. This violent cycle sends blood pressure soaring and wrecks metabolic health. And the terrifying part is the patient rarely remembers waking up. They just feel exhausted all day.
But the text provides rapid screening tools. They mention the Epworth Sleepiness Scale and an acronym called the Stop Bang Questionnaire. I'm looking at Stop Bang right now. It stands for snoring, tiredness, observed apnea, meaning a partner hears you start breathing, high blood pressure, BMI, age, neck circumference, and gender. Why does the doctor care about my neck circumference for a sleep issue?
Because of the simple physics of the airway we just discussed. If you carry excess adipose tissue, fat around your neck, gravity physically pulls that extra weight down onto your trachea when you lie flat and your muscles relax.
Oh, that makes sense.
A larger neck circumference is a direct mechanical risk factor for the airway collapsing. If you are constantly exhausted, snore loudly, or have a larger neck, getting screened for sleep apnea is critical.
Absolutely.
This raises an important question, though, when we look at this entire blueprint.
Which is?
Well, our entire modern lifestyle actively fights against our biological baseline. The endless blue light from our screens suppressing melatonin, the convenience of ultra-processed late-night snacks, the societal glorification of sacrificing rest for productivity, we've engineered a physical environment that makes our natural need for recovery nearly impossible to maintain without conscious, deliberate effort.
Which perfectly sets up our final thought for today. Let's briefly recap your ultimate evidence-based daily blueprint. First, fuel the machine right. Cook whole foods at home so you naturally bypass the hidden sodium that damages your vessels and the added sugars that trigger insulin resistance.
Right, control the inputs.
Second, use the machine. Get that 150 minutes of moderate movement a week, but just as importantly, stand up and stretch frequently to break up the toxic metabolic exhaust of sedentary desk time. And third, put the machine in the shop. Fiercely protect that 7 to 9 hour sleep window, because that is the only time your metabolic health is actually forged.
Executing these three pillars consistently isn't about hoping you avoid a bad diagnosis at your next physical. It is about true primordial prevention.
Squaring the curve.
Exactly. It is about fundamentally squaring your curve, pushing any potential decline to the absolute furthest edge of your lifespan so you can live a deeply vibrant, highly capable life.
But let's be honest, knowing the blueprint is the easy part. Executing it every single day is hard. The source text briefly touches heavily on behavioral economics, the psychology of how humans make decisions. Willpower is not an infinite battery. You will eventually run out of it.
You definitely will.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative challenge. Look around your life right now. How can you redesign your immediate physical environment today? What can you fundamentally alter in your kitchen, your workspace, or your bedroom so that the absolute healthiest choice in this daily blueprint automatically becomes the easiest, laziest choice you can possibly make?
Make the right choice the path of least resistance.
Precisely. Don't rely on sheer willpower to maintain that classic car. Put the phone charger across the room so you can't doom scroll in bed. Leave the running shoes literally blocking the front door. Hide the processed snacks in the garage, or better yet, don't buy them at all. Set up your environment so the daily maintenance happens almost on autopilot. Take your first step towards squaring your curve today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.